So excited to be here. Got stuck in a little bit of traffic on the way over, but
Thank you for having me.
Finally made it.
Great.
So Andy, you've been a part of some pretty iconic consumer e-commerce marketplace companies, StubHub, Gilt, where you were president actually, and then you recently left, and your next move was joining 23andMe. Why get into the health genome sector?
So I had been advising Ann almost since inception, somewhat informally, and then more formally starting in 2008. And I just watched the company's mission evolve, and the management team and the focus, and then a whole bunch of really interesting factors, both within the company and the market generally, started to evolve in early 2012 when I joined the board, and then more recently in mid-2013 when I joined the company. So the cost of genetics coming down significantly, making it much more affordable and available to people. The overall attention to wellness, individuals wanting to manage their health, and just a general awareness of genetics. And so it's just the perfect confluence of lots of different things coming together where my skill set, which is not genetics, there's lots of PhDs and bioscientists and other bioinformatics professionals at the company. And so my skill set could be utilized given everything going on in the marketplace.
So tell us exactly what 23andMe does, just for anyone in the crowd that doesn't know that.
So we provide a personal genetics service. So one way of thinking about it is it's a technology that we utilize called genotyping. So people may be familiar with a full genome. A full genome cost $100 million in the year 2000 to complete. It's now anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 today. So that's a complete genome. Another technology is sequencing a gene. 98% of our genetics are the same, and it's just a small portion, 2% or so, that is different. So we actually look at a fraction of that 2%. We probably look at 1/10,000th of the amount of data that even a sequencing a gene looks at. And that genotyping looks at mutations or variants in our makeup, in the individual's genetic makeup. And that causes differences in us, whether it's physical traits or possible diseases. And so it's a service where people can provide a saliva sample that we process and then log on to the site after a few weeks where we send it to a CLIA-certified lab where the process is analyzed. The information is accurate, and then people have the opportunity to learn about themselves.
Well, so that process now costs $99, and the company actually, in a really sort of, I think, monumental move, dropped that price from $299 to $99 about a year ago. How has that affected growth? And could you tell me a little bit about that decision? Because it was very transformative, from what I understand.
Well, first I'll step back. The company's mission is to enable individuals to explore their DNA and to access that information directly. Also, an important aspect of our mission is to further science through genetic exploration and to engage individuals in that process, in that research process. So as a result of what was going on, or what has gone on with respect to the cost of technology, that enabled us to drop it, and it really was core to our research mission. It enabled more people to be engaged in research, more people to get their information, and it was the right time for the company. We had received an investment at the time from some of the folks that were listed earlier, including Uri Milner, that enabled us to do that. The company hasn't led with unit economics or profitability of a particular user as many startups do, as Gilt Group did and StubHub and other companies I've been involved with. We've led with a research mission, and that's been the most important thing. And monetizing has been secondary, monetizing data or what have you.
Well, you mentioned data. I mean, that's a huge part of what you guys are trying to do. And there's the data that the consumer gets when they test their genes. What have you thought about when it comes to monetizing that data, and how are you approaching that?
So let's talk about data. I was here a couple months ago at a big data conference, which is ironic because we don't specialize in big data. We specialize almost in data avoidance. Like there's this massive amount of genomic information, and we just take a piece of it. So the data that we take in is a gene variant file. It's not particularly robust, but there is a lot of data, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's not what people may think. So the genetic data and genetic databases and proprietary genetic databases, of which there are out there, especially public companies that have a high market share in certain genetic tests. That's interesting, but we don't think that it is a differentiator. We don't think it's going to lead in the discovery of gene associations and other things that we're focused on. It's the phenotypic data that's interesting to us in addition to the genetic information.
So give an example of
phenotypic data is the survey data that people take when they engage. So 90% of our customers opt into research, and that is the exploration of either themselves or of topics that they can explore on our site. And they answer this information, and we collect millions. Last week, we probably collected 5.5, 6 million phenotypic data points. And so,
give me an example of a question.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it could be as simple as height, eye color. It could be one's health background, where they live. Do they live next to a coal plant? And what's their age? I mean, it could be lots of different things that are just interesting. And so what is data intensive, back to the point a few minutes ago, is when we look at our database, we're looking at 500,000 people times all the various SNPs, which is the hundreds of thousands of pieces of DNA that we look at, times thousands of phenotypic data points. That's analytically intense, and we're good at that.
And then now that you have that data, so let's talk about what you do with that data. So you've now had all that data from, you have hundreds of thousands of customers. What do you do with that data on the back end? And is there a potential in selling that data or sharing that data with research institutions? I know you've already sort of gone in that direction.
We have. So there's lots of things that we have done and we will continue to do. We're still a young company. So we have already amassed, for example, over 10,000 Parkinson's patients in a community, and so which is the largest in the world. And then but it's, like I said, it's not just the community, and it's not just the genetic information we have on the people within that community. It's all the phenotypic information on top, and that the marriage of those things we think is quite special. So we have made discoveries with respect to the Parkinson's community and some of the gene associations, but it's early with respect to that. And so we do partner with research institutions. We partner with academic institutions, with pharma companies, and we look at various communities. And while we monetize that, it's still our focus is still in our approach to research, which is new, and also sharing what we do and how we do it with the research community.
So you are selling some of that data. How do you rationalize that to the consumer? And have you had any pushback from the consumer on the fact that this data is going to be monetized for profit?
It's very clear. As I said, 90% of people very clearly opt in. And so in order to make advances in science, we need data to do that. And so privacy is paramount. We don't offer people's individual identity as we work with research institutions. But it's core to what we're about. It's partnering with individuals, it's partnering with pharma, it's partnering with other academic institutions. And our customers applauded our engagement rate. If you look at our engagement rate relative to social networking sites, it's incredible. We don't solve for engagement as a company when we talk about typical venture capital metrics, where how often how many emails can we send out, and what's the response rate of those emails, and what's too many emails, and what's not enough. We don't do that. Our customers are, please talk to us. We're interested. We're engaged. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about I'm learning about others in a similar situation. And one can imagine years from now having communities, not like Parkinson's, but many of those. And if you had 50,000 or 100,000 people with Crohn's, why, if you were somewhere on the planet and had Crohn's, why would you not become a member? And what are all the various ways one could monetize that? It could be advertising. It could be clinical trial recruitment. It could be research. It will be research. So there's lots of ways to eventually explore the monetization path. It's just, at the moment, it's about building that infrastructure and paving the way to that scale.
You mentioned pharmaceutical companies, researchers, but even some countries are interested in this data, right? When it comes to their specific, the specific people in their country. Is that correct?
There are other countries that are interested. Some are interested in full genetic genome projects, so a full genome on an individual. Others are interested in working not directly with the consumer, which is not our core value proposition or focus, but more as an arm's length study of their population. So there's just general awareness, availability of the technology. I think there's lots of startups in the Valley that are approaching full sequencing in certain ways, but they all seem to be headed to the same place, which is utilizing genetics increasingly in a clinical environment as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about what Anya had kind of alluded to earlier, which was some pushback that you guys had from the FDA, that basically they took an action to prevent you from selling and marketing these home genetic kits last week. Could you elaborate a little bit more on your response to that, and whether you consider 23andMe to be a medical device, which is what their point was? Right.
So I'm sure many of the people in the audience are aware of the press that we received. So we did receive a warning letter from the FDA, and responding to that is our highest priority. So we did not meet the FDA's expectations with respect to communication and timeline, and that responding is our highest priority. We think that regulation over genetics and the genetics industry will be paramount and important for the industry's success. But because we're right in the middle of that, so I can't comment any more than I have with respect to it. I appreciate the question, but.
And could you talk a little bit just more broadly about the marketing? I mean, you have done a pretty broad marketing push since you came on board. Can you tell me about that and what you guys are doing on the marketing side of things to make this more accessible and known to the greater community?
We did have a fairly broad marketing push. Just as more recently, we're no longer on TV, we're no longer on radio, and we have ceased other direct marketing activities, typical online activities, while we're in these discussions.
I want to talk a little bit about the education angle of genetics and what you're doing, because that's a huge part of probably your challenge, but also it's your opportunity as well. Let's talk about the consumer first, and then I want to talk about the medical community. But from the consumer, let's just say, and actually I have a 23andMe kit at home that I haven't yet tested. I have a small baby, but I need to, but I'm scared a little bit. But when I get those test results back, are you doing anything beyond just giving me the test results to educate me on what I could do with those results?
Yeah. So first of all, yes. So the way in which we present the information, which is using very easy to read graphs, and the way we spend a lot of time making sure that the language that we use is appropriate for broad audiences, and then there's the notion of being able to drill down deeper and deeper and deeper into specifics. And for those that have a scientific background, there's plenty of information for that individual. But let me just I'll tell you something I learned about myself, and then we can go into other ways we educate. So my results were kind of boring, but when I drilled in a little bit more deeply, I have a condition called pseudochlorine estase or something like that. I'm sure I may have butchered the pronunciation, but it's a disorder where I likely, not definitely, but likely metabolize certain drugs differently than the general population that are used in anesthesia. So if I'm under general anesthesia, I could be under duress, know it, but not be able to communicate, and all this stuff that's kind of gnarly. And what's the likelihood that this is relevant? And this was only a couple months ago I discovered it, but my daughter had foot surgery recently. I just brought the results in, and the doctor wasn't familiar with what it was. I showed the anesthesiologist. He said, "That's amazing. This is the enzyme. This is the issue. Not relevant to your daughter because she's not going to have a tube. But if she, this is something that you should know. It should be in your record." And so to me, having that data, presenting it to a medical professional, allowing them to figure out what to do with it, that was a good experience. And so part of it I learned on the site, but I went to a medical professional at the appropriate time and learned. So, but general education was your question. So we've launched a course online with Udacity called Tales of the Genome, I believe it's called. We have our own Genetics 101 course. We have just the whole layout of the site. Everything we do is about empowering the customer to learn. And so
genetic counseling is a big aspect of this, because if you do have something that's going to potentially give you a disease later on, that one-on-one counseling is helpful. Do you provide that, or do you hook
We encourage it.
that?
It's when we talk about innovation and other things that the companies do, it's something that it's highly likely that it's a priority for us. So I'll put it that way, just because we get asked the question. We have a very robust staff of geneticists, and so when somebody has a unique situation or question, we're small enough still that customer service will say, I'm not equipped to answer that question, and we can help them internally. We're very quick to point them to outside resources, but it's likely something that we will do in the future.
You mentioned the doctor that you talked to, and he seemed receptive to that. But, in my research, there are a lot of doctors that are not receptive to, genetics testing, and they don't necessarily think that some of this information is useful. How do you educate the medical community? Because I read something that 90% of doctors today they have the same amount of genetics information that you or I, basic have. So how do you go about that?
Well, I think there's 1,300 geneticists, MDs in the country. I mean, it's small. And so, but if we just explore, and it's outside of my background, outside of our focus as a company, but if we were just to explore companies that are doing sequencing of tumors. And so if you were to look at general practitioners versus oncologists, what the awareness, engagement, appreciation for genetics is different. And so there's no question in my mind that it will be mainstream. The question is when, how fast, in what communities. It'll likely be verticals that engage based on availability of certain tests or of discoveries. But there's no question that this will be mainstream.
I mean, genetics is becoming more of a, topic that's top of mind. As you look at Angelina Jolie, one of the actresses in this country who, very sort of publicly talked about being tested for the BRCA1 and 2 gene, and then taking action on that. How do things like that affect, your sales and sort of the uptick in engagement with 23andMe?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Angelina Jolie story other than what was in the press, and I'm sure she had a lot of engagement with her physician, which that's what one should do when faced with the information that I assume she had. But I think it speaks to just our mission overall, which is to encourage and enable individuals to explore their DNA, and that's what our service provides. And it it's a starting point to learn about you. We are as much about individual exploration as we are about research and enabling people to engage in research in a different way. It's not about subjects that get studied and then there's no follow-up. These are people that are engaged in research. They get results back to them, and we focus a bit more on that aspect of how genetics can impact the world.
I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about some of the science here. You said that 23andMe doesn't yet sequence the entire genome. That's something that you can pay $10,000 to do. Do you ever see 23andMe getting into doing that and then potentially lowering the price the same way they've done it for the smaller segment of the genome?
The technology is changing very quickly, and I think that, and we track it closely. I think that different offerings will require different engagements with the physician community, and given the discussions with the FDA, it's really important that the industry be appropriately regulated, and so. I think given those discussions, that's probably as far as I can go on that topic.
Okay. Talking about the technology angle, this is a pretty basic question, but do you consider yourself a technology company or a medical devices company or a health company?
That's an interesting question. I think, well, we're a mission-based company, and hopefully that's coming across with my comments today, and we're utilizing technology and the community to enable that. I like to think of ourselves as a platform. The word is overused, but it isn't hard to imagine all the things that we could become at the appropriate time with the appropriate product. We have an API, and so we launched that about a year ago. There's hundreds of developers using it today. And an example of an application is the Stanford Sports Genetics Group. I'm not sure if that's the full correct name, but anyway, they pull in our API, and so customers would opt in to this if you use their application, and then as a result of that, this group would then make recommendations on training and other health-related topics, and because one can learn about muscle twitch and other things from our test. Are you a long-distance runner, or are you a sprinter? And so you can see how these things can get married up into a training regimen. So there are a bunch of people using it as a community, but we're 125 people, lots of priorities, and so this is creating that community of developers, just one of them.
You have a pretty open approach with data, when it comes to having an API. Users who get their results can actually share them on Facebook. I mean, it's definitely something that's different from some of the other competitors you've had in your field, especially considering this is very sensitive information. What are the challenges involved in that? And then, also, is that just an overall strategy that you are all very conscious of?
So one's genetic data, that's you. You own it. And we think you should have it, and there is fear about knowing one's genetic composition, and part of our belief system is knowing is empowering, and so we believe that people should be able to take this data and download it, and if they want to post certain portions of it, it's quite important to make sure people know what they're posting, and so we walk people through steps to make sure that they know exactly what they're doing, so they don't, by mistake, post something that they hadn't intended to, but that's their data, and just like you have a patient file or other personal data, you should be able to take that with you and explore.
When it comes to handling that sensitive data, I mean, even for other entrepreneurs or founders in the audience who are dealing with sensitive data, which doesn't necessarily always need to be health data, but could be financial data or so on. Do you have any advice on how to tread in that sort of ecosystem when it comes to privacy and balancing all of that?
Well, we have a team of consultants both outside the company and then professionals inside the company that focus on privacy. We want to be and believe we are and will continue to be the trusted source for your genetic information. Making sure that stays locked down and you're in control of it is absolutely essential. You can talk about it, or you can invest in infrastructure and technology and professionals to be best of breed in that area, and we think we are. So I think it's how important is it? What are the resources spent? Is it top of mind, or is it just something that is discussed and we really make it a priority? And it can be expensive, and we're okay with that.
Do you think there's ever going to be a day when genetic tests, the results are public, where an insurance company could see it? I mean, that is a little bit of the fear with some of the people who are pushing back on genetic testing as a whole. Do you see that ever happening in the future?
That would be disappointing if for a lot of people, and that's not something that I have any visibility into. It's certainly not the case today, and so I don't have insights into whether or not that will happen or could happen. But people are going to be able to explore their genetic data and learn about themselves, and there's a lot of fun things to learn too. It's not just heavy topics. People can learn about their ancestry, which is a huge emphasis that we have, and the innovations we've had, be able to see what portions come from where, and even what percentage Neanderthal you are. That's cool. It's fun, and so people don't engage just because of fear of a certain outcome, but because they just want to learn, and it's a great place to explore.
Well, so your company had said that the goal was to have about 1 million users by the end of this year. How close are you to that? Yep. And is that in the horizon?
So, well, first of all, I want to make sure the stat is correct, sure. Just because we have published certain information, sometimes more than other young companies do. And so what we announced in the early December of 2012 was selling 1 million. So selling for us can be business development partnerships that expand over time. It can be through our typical marketing channels, et cetera. And so that was the first time we ever introduced the concept of selling as opposed to just how many people in the database. So we do have over 500,000 people in the database today, as you pointed out earlier. But we've actually sold through more than that. So probably 150, 200,000 people more than that. I think, based on the current discussions we're having, I'm not going to project where we reach certain objectives, just because these discussions are so important, and we want to make sure that we partner closely with the FDA at responding to their concerns.
When you think about the product and engagement, how do you keep the engagement going beyond just, you get your test results, then maybe you participate in the survey, but then how do you capture the customer back to engage with what you're doing?
As I was saying earlier, it's unlike any e-commerce company I've either been involved with or advised. They keep coming back, and it's not too surprising when you think about, I get to learn about myself. How many places do you get to do that? So the people come back because we have a product called Relative Finder, and so we know if just through genetics, if you have a relative in the database, and you can opt in to somebody anonymously reaching out. So there's a lot of screens, so it's not invasive, but it's a cool product. So people may engage for that reason. They may engage because there's just a whole bunch of surveys that they're interested in and topics that are relevant to them. We're finding that, that people just come back because they just want to continue to explore, as I mentioned. If we do reach out with a targeted survey, we'll get 80-90% response rate. Meaning we know that somebody has opted into certain research or topic, and we have a question that's relevant to them, and it's just an overwhelming response. So it's an engaged community.
When you think about future products and innovations at the company on the consumer side, are you sort of, what are some of those areas that you would, consider expanding to? You said potentially genetic counseling. Are there any other sort of innovative areas that you were thinking through?
Well, it's funny when we think about, when you ask the question about innovation, the whole company and its approach to research and engaging with consumers, which I should be coming up now as a recurring theme today, because that's what we're about. That's innovative, right? What we've done on the ancestry side with ancestry composition, that's innovative. We've come across and discovered many gene associations, right? So our research is we look at the gold standard of research, which is published peer-reviewed papers. We validate those through our genetic findings, and so the whole company is oriented around research. The culture is different from a company selling widgets and getting a big sale one day or losing a big sale the next day, and you're on a high, you're on a low. People are looking out, and we're focused on new potential associations that we're discovering, new phenotypic data points that are coming in that we can explore. The next the PhD that we're able to grab from a well-known research institute that's going to lead a particular effort. That's what rings a bell internally more than the classic P&L driving metrics that many of us are more accustomed to.
So this is going to sound like a weird question coming from a journalist, but you've had a lot of controversy, not just with the FDA, but because you're in the genetics world, there has been some bad press, some challenging press. For any
some awesome press as well.
and awesome press, that's right. For any founders in the audience or entrepreneurs who do deal with some controversy, bad press, how do you deal with that?
Well, we're particularly fortunate because we have a founder who is Anne Wojcicki, who is just very mission-driven herself, and so it isn't. It's not by surprise or mistake or happenstance that we are so driven toward enabling individuals to reach to learn about themselves through genetics, to a new transformative approach to research. All these things are driven first and foremost by our founder. I think that we're calm and confident, and because of the space we're in, there's going to be occasionally a pothole here and there. And maybe we'll feel at times that we're swimming against the tide. At times we're going to have a lot of wind at our back, and that's just that's I think many startups. And to your point, we're just in a slightly different space. But I think we're reaching a point now, and the prospects of more regulation in the industry, I think, will really assist in clarifying what an important and critical opportunity is for people to learn about themselves.
That's a good way to open it up to some questions and answers. Does anyone have a?
Yes.
Do you appreciate that consumer engagement? Are you seeking to get more of it? Are you seeking to drive it? Or are you just kind of, we'll deal with it ourselves and just stay out of it?
So the question was about the FDA letter and the consumer advocacy that has resulted from the broad support and consumer engagement. So the FDA is an incredibly important partner for us, and as I mentioned earlier, we didn't meet their expectations in communication timeline, and responding is our top priority right now. And so while we appreciate any organization, institution, individual that is supportive of our mission, the most important thing for us right now is to respond to that communication from the FDA. Yes?
Hundreds of millions of DNA information about a lot of people around the world. How are you going to secure all this information? How are you going to make sure that it's going to stay secure once you're going to pass the threshold to these large amounts of people that actually are going to use your service? Have you thought about that, or is it too early?
Yeah. So the question is, how are we going to secure the information that we have? And we believe we have some unique approaches, which we haven't announced yet, to provide security and protection. And one looks at where genetic results are stored today from tests that people take in a clinical environment, and it's often just in a file behind the desk of the check-in person. So we think there's a lot of work to be done in general in the industry, so this is one of the areas that we focus on. And so it's through resources and hiring the best consultants and the best people internally, and that's what we're doing. So it's, as I mentioned, it's a top priority, but we still we know we have a lot to learn, and I think making it a top priority, recognizing that continuous improvement is critical, is our current strategy.
The lady in the back.
So the question around startups typically try to avoid government regulation, and then how to avoid what before they crop up the regulation?
Regulations, issues, conflicts.
Yeah. So it's hard to speak outside of, I don't consider myself a government regulation expert, and fortunately.
I'm assuming you didn't deal with that at Gilt.
No, but every company. So at Gilt, it's or let's just take Gilt out of it. But in companies that are in the e-commerce space, often have to focus on pricing, and in companies in the mobile space, it's about certain aspects about advertising. So I think most companies have. StubHub is a great example because of all the ticketing laws by state that were very different from state to state, and StubHub was on the forefront of pushing the envelope on some of those rules and how that works. So I think most companies actually, when you peel them back, have waters to navigate. So not speaking specifically about our discussions, because again, those are confidential and quite sensitive. I would say that transparency is critical, sticking to the defined process. So sometimes it's challenging to work outside of the established processes. And if you're going to work outside of established processes, make sure you know what you're getting into.
The opportunity once you identify maybe new associations of genes with specific traits or characteristics, are you leaving the opportunity of reaching out to your customers, bringing them kind of more information on the sample that they had already kind of kept with you.
Could you repeat the first part of the question about full sequencing? I didn't hear that part. I just want to make sure that people know what we're doing and not doing.
Definitely. You mentioned that at the time you are sequencing only a portion of genome, and that's how you're keeping the prices down. So at this point, you have information about associating specific genes with specific
Right.
traits and characteristics.
Yep.
As you collect more phenotypic information, are you keeping an avenue open to communicate back to your past customers to communicate more information to them?
So yeah, it's an interesting question. One way of thinking about it is understanding one's genetics, which is currently the technology we utilize is genotyping, as I think is what you pointed out at the beginning of the discussion. That's a journey, right? And so not only will we learn more phenotypic information from individuals, but we'll also learn about more genetic associations. Or one may receive a test or some other information through a physician, which we would embrace, and to marry that data together. And so we view this as an evolution for us as well. It's a journey. It's a lifetime journey, and we would applaud the ongoing engagement and education for both parties, both the individual as well as for us. And that's one of the reasons why customers are so engaged. Is they, as I said, we collect millions of phenotypic data points per week. We take that in, we share back out the learnings, and it's a two-way street. And that partnership with our customers is absolutely essential to who we are and how we'll evolve.
Okay, so basically, you said it's a two-way street. You see your customers possibly adding more information to you that they get from physicians, so you could associate with the genome, and on the other side, also communicate more information at a later point back to your customers as you collect more information and kind of generalize it and process it.
Yeah, well, I think generally the answer is yes. I mean, it's we have to come up with specific. We hired a director of medical affairs that works with physicians. We're going to increasingly work on tools to educate physicians. As we talked about earlier, there's not a lot of geneticists in the country. There's only pockets of physicians that are really focused on or engaged or really have an education around genetics. And so we want to be able to help. There's lots of resources out there that are available. And so part of what we're trying to do is navigate the ecosystem and engage physicians whenever appropriate.
Thank you.
Well, I don't see any other questions. Or there is one, okay.
Hi, Andy. Very interesting speech. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Definitely genetics is forefront of the science now. And I understand that you're trying to follow this know thyself principle by Socrates. But in the light of FDA actions, what other marketing strategies do you consider to promote your services? For example, do you think about partnerships with other companies like Ancestry.com and other services that help people to know themselves better and maybe to use genome decoding to find relatives, and maybe this can be another service for you. Yeah. So maybe your ideas about future of your company and other services.
Yeah, so I'm sure you can appreciate if you read the letter, I can't speak to specific marketing just for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But we have a lot of respect for any company, especially Ancestry.com and what they've accomplished, and others that are using genetics for any learning, right? Whether it's ancestry-based learning or other health-based learning. So partnerships is a real possibility for us, but because of the marketing as the foundation of your question, I really can't speak to it.
Side and the
Ancestry. Yeah.
Ancestry side, thank you. Which one do you find people engage in most and sort of come back and use? And then the fun question, did you dig up Marie Antoinette, or how do you know that someone's related to her?
So the question on genetics, the ancestry versus genetics. I'm interested in the same thing as far as the reasons for the incredible engagement when it's not something that we're, as I said earlier, solving for. I've been at companies where we solve for engagement. This is different. So it makes sense that somebody who is a student of their past, they're interested in their past, and they're interested in relatives, and companies like Ancestry.com, where one can gather census data as well. It makes sense that they would also be interested in their own health. They're interested in family health and the marriage between those. So I was expecting, when I looked into some of our usage metrics, I was expecting there to be a heavier use in one group or the other, because it's not an obvious marriage, right, until one really becomes more familiar with the company and the reasons why our customers are so engaged. Then it's quite natural. But it's an interesting, as we evolve, it's an interesting product challenge, product experience challenge, which I think would be a whole different panel because of the differences between the two. But it's an ecosystem that builds. So while we may have people that come to the site solely for ancestry, that's what they appear to be engaged in, they migrate to health and vice versa. Yes.
More questions?
Mm-hmm. So the question was about certain populations and the way in which they tie back to various geographic regions, and I think it also incorporates some questions about non-human DNA, which causes us to work on percentage of Neanderthal and other things. I think that kind of ancestry composition and attribution is beyond what I'd be able to answer in a concise way, and that's what the experience is all about, right? Because the site is I think will help you out quite a bit. It's exceptional with respect to understanding ancestry and background. It's groundbreaking. You can't experience what we offer in another site. So I'm going to have to point you back to discover it that way than my ability to get to that level of attribution.
One more question over there. I'm sorry, we have just one microphone.
So maybe this is a good one to wind up on. Thinking really long term, do you see that we could have a large percentage of the population's genetic data and a large percentage of the population's health history, and mapping those to doing some predictive algorithms to have this as a public good in the future?
So I think that there's no question about genetic databases. There are already public genetic databases that are available, and they're growing, and there's more and more out there. I don't think that proprietary databases are going to be the wave of the future as it relates to genetics. And we're watching how that evolves very carefully, because we're in favor of that momentum. The phenotypic data is hard to get unless one has interaction with consumers. So pharmaceutical companies that go through trials, they don't typically do phase 4 trials, and there isn't that follow-up in order to get that direct interaction with the consumer. So we think we have a unique opportunity to do that as appropriate as the industry evolves. And so my belief, our belief, the company's belief, is that this information will be known by the individual. Whether an individual's data will be out there, I'm interpreting that as a privacy thing, which maybe it wasn't intended that way. I think people's data will be private, but I think they will be well-versed in their genetic information, well-versed in what that means for them. I think they will have lots of interaction with their physician about ways in which genetics can impact their health, and it won't be scary. And I think that whatever my guess is, maybe 10 to 20% of this room has engaged in some kind of genetic test about themselves, and I think that number will be up 300% in the next few years. I think it's going to be a much different tool than currently used for the medical community, and just as a fun way of learning about yourself, and an important way of learning about yourself.
Oh, two more questions.
Hello, my name is Arseny Yeremin. I'd like to know what are the top 3 false assumptions made about 23andMe?
So what are the top 3 false assumptions made about 23andMe? Well, first of all, I don't know false assumptions. I think that it's a marketplace that's evolving. It's an technology that's evolving. It's becoming available to people, and so it's. I think there's people are generally interested. This room is testimony to that, and so I don't know if fear is an assumption or not, but that's one that comes to mind. There's a lot of people that are just concerned about knowing. There's a really interesting Fast Company article on the company, which I'd encourage you to look at, just that speaks to the evolution that the reporter went through as it relates to that. I think that sometimes people can assume that the company is a classic startup that's focused on monetization, when it's a truly research-driven, mission-based company that wants to do some really good and important things, and that's what we're about. And you wouldn't have to spend much time with the company to realize that. So, I think it's when a company isn't well understood yet, or a technology isn't well understood, or a space and an industry, then it's really education is, I think, the biggest challenge. Awareness is the biggest challenge.
So my last question is, if I may, so 23andMe is no longer a startup as we are used to this word, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience. So what would you recommend? How can entrepreneurs and startups use 23andMe, and how can they benefit from it?
So what's the definition of a startup, right? And within 20 miles of here, it's okay. When was your A, and then how many months or years or quarters to your B, and then G, or 3 years, you better have reached certain milestones, and so we're a startup. I mean, this is an industry that's evolving, and we're on the forefront of that, and it's real important that we listen to how other people around us are interpreting the industry, which is the reason why we're into some pretty important conversations right now about the regulation of the industry. So I feel like it's a startup. It's just that it's and by the way, the number was inaccurate earlier. I think we raised over $100 million, but not 160. And so I think it's just taken longer, but it's gone through many of the same steps. What's unique is the amount of capital, the amount of time, and the fact that it's constantly on the edge of various aspects of the marketplace. So, who are your investors? Do they get it? Are they classic in their monetization strategies and liquidation expectations? Are they aligned with the vision and the founder? And we're very fortunate in that we have that alignment. We don't have conversations in our board meetings about, okay, so you're going public when? It's, are we evolving as we set out to do? And while the company's been around for 6 or 7 years, our mission hasn't changed. When I sat down with Ann and the co-founder, and I guess I'll end on this statement, in late 2006, early 2007, and I didn't actually understand what she was talking about. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Sandy Robertson, And when she talked and talked, and Linda Avery, the co-founder, talked and talked about it, I said, so let me get this straight. We want to be 23andMe wants to be the trusted partner as you explore you and go through this journey of genetic information discovery. And they're like, yeah, I think that's right. And it's been a while, and that hasn't changed. And so I think that's unique, and I think that's special, and that's what 23andMe is about.
Well, thank you so much, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.